On today's Locked On Thunder podcast, is this season a championship or bust year for the Oklahoma City Thunder? Plus, let's get you set for the NBA trade deadline.
You are Locked On Thunder, your daily Oklahoma City Thunder podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Let's get it going on the Locked On Thunder podcast on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host, media member, and beat writer for Thunder on SI, Rylan Stiles. Follow me on Twitter at Rylan_Stiles. Follow the show on Twitter at LOThunderPod. Email the show, LOThunderPod@gmail.com. On today's show, brought to you by our good friends over at Game Time. Go download the Game Time app, create your account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. We're joined by Brandon Rahbar at Brandon Rahbar on Twitter, dailythunder.com, to discuss the Oklahoma City Thunder and this season by large. Is this a championship or bust year? What kind of expectations are put on this season? Therefore, what do those expectations mean for the NBA trade deadline? Brandon, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. Just got done playing pickup hoops. The Thunder were off tonight, 2 nights in a row, so I got to go play some ball. When I'm not covering the Thunder, ball is life, Rylan. I got to play myself.
Ball never sleeps, and Brandon was lighting it up from beyond the arc, the best shooter in Oklahoma, especially right now. I mean, the team's in San Francisco, so Isaiah Joe's not here. None of the guys are here, so it's Brandon Rahbar. If you need a three-pointer in the state, give him a DM on Twitter at Brandon Rahbar. But this season has been nothing short of incredible for the Thunder, frankly. I mean, to be the best record in the NBA, to be on track and on pace for a historic season in terms of like the best record in franchise history, and the new like in-season over-under is set at 64.5 wins for this team. And to put that into perspective, Chet Holmgren has played 10 games for this team. Hartenstein has missed 20 more, and Caruso's missed 19. And we know that AJ Mitchell is out for 10 to 12 weeks. And so to weather the storm in terms of injuries to still be this good is telling of how talented this roster is and how they do have the bones of a championship team. And anytime that before the year you're picked to go win a championship and you're looked upon as the favorites, we can really get into these like buzzwords and catchphrases and the pressure of like, if you don't win a title, then you were frauds. If you don't win a title, then you're a disappointment. It's championship or bust. Whatever your favorite version of those sayings is, just implement it here. And I don't think that that's fair for the Oklahoma City Thunder, because while they can go win a championship and they have the talent to do so, they have the roster to do so, in my opinion, they have the coach to do so, it's incredibly hard to go win a championship. Only one team gets to hoist the Larry O'Brien trophy. Only 2 teams get to make the NBA finals. And you have a lot of other teams disappointed as the confetti is falling. Brandon, how do you put into perspective this season where you know the Thunder are good enough to win a championship, but by the same token, at least in my opinion, it feels too strong to label it championship or bust?
Yeah, it's definitely not championship or bust. You can be a contender. You can even be a title favorite. You can be the best team in the NBA for 82 games, but that doesn't mean it's championship or bust for a couple of different reasons. Like you said, most importantly, it is hard to win a title. There's a lot of talent out there. There's a lot of talented teams. And, you never know matchup-wise who you're going to get in the NBA. If you're make it to the Western Conference Finals and get, a healthy Mavs team or Jokic, or you make it to the finals and you play a healthy Celtics team that's hitting on all cylinders, or the Cavs. Like, look, I think that you think that this Thunder team is maybe the best team in the NBA right now. And they've played that way, and they've played that way without Chet. They played that way with Hartenstein missing a huge chunk of the season, with Caruso missing a big chunk of the season. So I think that we both believe, and many fans believe, and analysts believe, that the Thunder can go win a title, but it is hard to win a title. The other thing is the Thunder are young. They're still very young, and that's not to give them an excuse. I think that they are ready to go win a title, and they are wise and mature beyond their years. They don't play like a young team, but they are still young, and you still got to go through playoffs and get your lumps and all that. We saw that last year. But the thing is, Sam Presti has set this team up to be sustainable, successful for a long time. These players are young and on long-term contracts, locked up. So they're going to get, a bite at the apple of contention this year, and hopefully, health-wise next year and the year after that. They're set up to take many bites of the apple, to be sustainable. I know that's like one of those key words that, Thunder fans have heard a lot throughout the years. But even more so, I think, than that first era of basketball, the way things are set up with this team being so young and having so many assets and so much flexibility and having so much depth around their big three of SGA, Chet, and J-Dub, I think this team can be a contender for many years. So I don't think it's championship or bust. No, absolutely not. They can win a title, but that doesn't mean it's championship or bust.
And this goes back to the preseason of, with those expectations comes pressure. But what we were saying on this show, and you were on for some of those preview shows, to grade this season at the end of the year, to say, is it a pass fail? Is it a disappointment, or is it a success, is going to take patience and nuance and context. And you look no further than NBA history. And if the Thunder won a championship this year, it would be an anomaly. It's your second ever crack at the postseason for this extremely young core. For them to, in their second attempt, to go win a title is unprecedented. It's unheard of. And therefore, if they fall short of that goal, to me, you can't hold them to that standard of being an anomaly. You've got to hold them to the standard of what we've seen. I can understand if, like, this team loses in the conference finals or loses in the NBA finals, and you're saying to yourself, dang it, I thought this team was really good, and they would still be really good. I think that part of the pressure from the outside comes with the inevitable of, if this team does lose short of winning the title, you're going to get inundated with pictures of that Kevin Durant, Russell Westbrook, James Harden moment in Miami, and you've just got to separate church and state. Like, that has no bearing on what this team will do or will accomplish. And you look at the two most recent teams who we've talked about having that dynastic potential, the Denver Nuggets and the Boston Celtics. For Denver, once Jokic finally started making the playoffs as a player, they went Western Conference semifinals. So, like, they lost in the second round, just like this team did. They went Western Conference finals. They went back down to losing in the second round. They lost in the first round. Then they won the title. Then they lost in the second round. Like, that's what Jokic did, who's widely appraised as the best player in the world, who's widely appraised as this Paul Bunyan-like figure, and doing stuff we've never seen since Wilt Chamberlain, and had the experience and won the title the year before he loses in the second round. Like, that's what Jokic did. Okay, and then Boston. Boston is the closest comparison there is to, like, having the young stars and needing it to all mesh. It's not a one-to-one comparison, because Boston did have a foundation of quality veterans that they brought these guys into, because it was Brooklyn's picks that they were able to use. But you just look at when the Tatum and Brown years began: conference finals, second round, conference finals, first round, lost in the finals, conference finals that they lost in, won the NBA championship. And now we look at Boston as, like, they have all this future ahead of them. They're going to be winning titles forever. They don't even care about the regular season anymore, because they've been there, done that. They're just going to go to the NBA championship and win the NBA finals every year. But yet it took heartbreak and heartache and building up these scars. It took being questioned. Can the Jays really win together? Can they really get it done? Can they really get over the hump? That's the stuff every team has had to endure from the start of time, since we've been playing on peach baskets. And if this Thunder team has to endure that, then so be it. Like, that's just par for the course with NBA history. Really, this season should only be looked at. I know that Thunder fans are sick of this idea of, like, house money, because at some point they want to feel something, right? They don't want to have these quote unquote excuses or whatever. I will just leave you with, if the Thunder won the title this year, they would be a NBA and I'd say sports anomaly to put it all together this quickly. So just hold that part of the season so close, and understand that as the trade deadline comes up next week, this isn't your one-time shot. Like, this isn't your your one time to make it big. This is just another step toward becoming what we believe this team can become.
Yeah. And, Shai is just now entering his prime, which is wild. Like, he is just now entering his prime. And the way that, obviously, if you look historically at prime years in the NBA, it's like 26 to 31, something like that. Some people say 27. Michael Jordan was 28 when he won his first title. I think LeBron was 28 when he won his first title. So, in addition to, like you said, the Nuggets and the Celtics, even going back historically, like the GOATs of the game didn't win their titles till they were older. And J-Dub is still a few years from his prime. Chet is a few years from his prime. These guys are going to get better. So this team, just from development, should get better and grow together. Like the big three, the Thunder have SGA, MVP frontrunner, and two budding all-stars. J-Dub may be an all-star this year, and I think we all believe in, Chet would have been an all-star this year if he would have continued his trajectory. He could be leading defensive player of the year, voting right now. He's going to get better. And so, Case and Wallace, and like, go through the list. These guys are young. They're going to get better. So not only do the Thunder have a lot of these guys locked up, long-term for several years, but throughout those contracts, this team is going to get better. So there's going to be, many cracks at the apple to try to win a title. So they've got a good shot this year, though. No doubt, without a doubt, this team can go win a title this year. But if they don't, I say coming into the season, like, Western Conference Finals would be a huge win, because it's another step. It would be one step further. Western Conference Finals is a great step. That first era of Thunder basketball, they went to one finals. That was KD and Russ, Harden. I mean, that was a great dominant team. They went to one finals and didn't win it. They went to 4 Western Conference Finals. So this team can win the title this year, but they don't have to win this title this year, because they're going to have more cracks at it.
They will have more bites at the apple, but they very well could win the title this year. So what does that mean for the trade deadline next week? We're going to talk about it all on today's show. But first, I want to say right now, but our good friends over at Game Time, go check out Game Time today, because attending NFL playoff games is an unforgettable experience to bring fans together. And you can go attend the big game if you go to Game Time and go check out their options. But if you're like me and you just love live events in general, including Thunder games, you can find Thunder tickets there, and then movies and theater and whatever live event you want to go to, you can go and get it through Game Time and check them out today. I love the ability to cut out all the guesswork with buying tickets for 2 reasons. Number one, they're only going to show you the great deals right up front for you, so you don't have to go scouring through seating maps to find your parameters. If it's 2 together with a good view and a good deal, they can filter all that for you. And I love that you toggle in their all-in pricing, and what you see when you add to cart is what you're going to get. There's no surprise fees at checkout. I cannot stand the surprise fees, and Game Time takes that out for you. Just as it takes out the guesswork of buying tickets with Game Time, go download the Game Time app, create your account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms and conditions apply. Again, create your account, redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Go download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. We're back on the Locked On Thunder podcast and the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day. Joining us today is Brandon Rahbar at Brandon Rahbar on Twitter and dailythunder.com. I'm Rylan Stiles, host of Locked On Thunder and beat writer for Thunder on SI. Brandon, it's been a lot of fun to see this team continue to evolve. And the next step of this team evolution could be the trade deadline. And there's 2 schools of thought. We kind of went over that in the first segment of the patient approach, and then also the approach of like, hey, this team's really good. Like, this team's awesome. That maybe they should go make a move. And the truth is usually somewhere in the middle, as we say on this show. Brandon, what is your mindset? If Sam Presti said, you know what, Brandon, I'm tapped out. I'm sick. I'm under the weather. I need Mr. Brandon Rahbar to come help me, finagle this trade deadline. What is your mentality with this team?
Yeah, so I see both schools of thought. First of all, I get both schools of thought. Like, I get this team is really good, can win a championship this year, so why not make them even better? And they have the assets to do it. But I also see the thought of, hey, to get somebody on this team, you're gonna have to give up some guys you don't want to let go of, and you're gonna have to give up some assets. And this team is playing really well. They're the best team in the NBA right now, and they're getting Chet back. And so, Sam, if he were to ask me, I probably would kind of straddle the fence and go somewhere in the middle. I'd probably make some moves, maybe some fringe moves, maybe get this team, say a third big, just in, insurance, just in case, because Chet and Hartenstein have both dealt with injuries this year, like something that's not going to break the bank. Maybe another creator for the bench with AJ Mitchell out. And, he's supposed to return before the playoffs, and I believe that he will. But, what kind of game shape is he going to be in? Like, how long is it going to get him to get back to how he was playing? So maybe like a small moves. And I would just look at like a third big and a creator for the bench. And those are just like fringe moves. I wouldn't, use any big assets or anything like that. Now, obviously, I'm sure we'll talk about Cam Johnson specifically. And if we wanted to bring that up, I would have, some thoughts on that possibly, depending on what the deal was. But that's what I would do.
Yeah, so we will talk about Cam Johnson extensively on the rest of the show. My thing is, it's the Thunder, right? And I typically don't like this cop-out, but it really applies to this deadline from what all we hear is like, you just don't know. Like, for all we know, the quietness is something that they are working behind the scenes, or the quietness is like, hey, this is a really dang good team, and you do not touch teams like this. And I tend to believe that it's the latter. Like they're not going to touch this team because they're so historically great. And you have to think about that for a second. I think that people get confused with like the idea that the Thunder won't do anything this deadline with complacency. I think it's the furthest thing from complacency. I think that it's giving themselves a chance, because what we said at the top of the show is the biggest point about the trade deadline. This team is historically great right now, both franchise-wise and their metrics of like being a historically great defense and doing things we've never seen before league-wide, that you have to know this team has not played a single second fully healthy. The idea of this team, the reason why this team was picked to go win the West, the reason why this team was picked to go to the NBA Finals and win the NBA Finals in some circles, has not played a single minute together. And yet they're still doing what they're supposed to be doing. And I just think that shows you how great this roster is, not just how top end heavy it is. So you'd be a fool, in my opinion, to not give yourself the opportunity to relish in that and to see what that nets you in the end, what that looks like in the playoffs. We haven't seen what it looks like in the regular season. So it's tough for me to say and sit here and beat the drum for, you got to go do this. You really got to go make this move, whenever we don't know what this team looks like when it's fully put together. And yet we do know that this version of the team is great. And kind of adjacent to that is their future, being that this is not their last chance to ever go make a move. They didn't make a massive move last trade deadline. They brought in Gordon Hayward. It got them salary cap. They went and got Caruso and went and got Hartenstein in the offseason when it's easier to go make transactions than in this mid-season point. And with that, you learn two lessons. Number one, it's exceptionally hard to bring somebody into a moving train, as Sam Presti said after the season. And that's twofold. That's one, the new player has to be integrated into this roster. And two, the player that leaves you have to have some mourning, for lack of a better word for that. I mean, Aaron Wiggins wore Trey Mann's jersey for like 7 straight practices as if he died. He went to Charlotte, which is the same thing in the NBA. But nonetheless, like, that stuff really does matter. And so to put a bow on it, for me, the reason why I would preach patience at this trade deadline is you're already going to have to learn so much about yourself post-trade deadline, because Chet's going to come back post-trade deadline. And you don't want to have to learn 2 massive things. Because I think that people forget that this isn't like 2K. Chet's not just going to like come back into the lineup and his ratings just restore back to where they were. He's that good or better, and the team chemistry stays the same, and the minutes stay the same, and you just plug them and play them, and bada bing, bada boom, they're playing basketball, right? when Chet comes back, you're going to have to explore lineups. You're going to have to explore rotations. You're going to have to explore 3-man lineups of like, how do we stagger these two guys? Who plays better with who? Does J-Dub play better with Chet because he picks and pops and frees up the lane? Or does he play better with Hartenstein, who creates more space on screens? All these little details have to be answered. And what amounts to, by the time Chet gets back, 20 games, at best, or whatever it is, like whenever Chet comes back, like it's end of February, early March. That's a lot by itself. Now imagine adding on top of it, oh yeah, just brought in this brand new player who has no idea about our system, which is pretty unique from any other NBA style of play around this league. I just think it's too much too fast, too much change too fast for a team that's already proving to you that they're a title contender. The best trade deadline acquisition this year will be Chet Holmgren. And so I just think that you have to rest in that. And again, that's not saying that this roster is perfect. That's not saying that the day the Thunder season ends, that they shouldn't go make a move to address whatever issues pop up in the postseason. We just don't know those issues yet. Like, I think that right now the common sense thought is they need a big four, and then that way they can have a big shooting four. J-Dub can play the 3, a more natural position size for him. Dort can now play the 2. Shai can play the 1. What if that guy's Chet Holmgren? Like, have we ever thought of that? Of like, what if the best closing lineup is Chet Holmgren in that Jaren Jackson Jr. role, Ihart playing the center role, J-Dub's now at the 3 as we all want, Dub's at the 2, Dort's at the 2, and Shai's at the 1. Like, we just don't know anything of the sort, to where it's hard for me to say definitively what this team should go do at the deadline. Therefore, I think you've already got the data that suggests you're a title team. You've already got the top end talent. Just cool it for a second and like let this team play out.
Yep, I agree. And, I asked Sam about, adding a player at the trade deadline this year, the preseason presser. And, he said the team made 2 big acquisitions in the summer. Those were the big acquisitions. And obviously those 2 acquisitions are paying off. And we've talked about how this team has been historic. If you add something to this team, what are they going to be really historic? Like, this is like an all-time defense. Like, I don't know how much more they can improve. They're going to improve by getting Chet Holmgren back into the mix. He's going to help, obviously, the defense with what he brings, rim protection, adding another 7-footer, playing with heart, having one, elite rim protector on the floor all 48 minutes. And obviously what he does on offense with his floor spacing, his shooting, how he can score at the rim. And we saw an aggressive Chet, the first 9 games that he played this year. I think that this team, adding Chet around the All-Star break, is going to be the best, trade acquisition that you can get. It's not a trade, but, adding Chet is going to be a better acquisition around the All-Star break than any team is going to make, I think. So yeah, that's why. And it's funny because a lot of the things that everyone loves about this team, like the chemistry and the depth and how they all get along and how they've got these guys on these really great friendly contracts that are going to help the team, like not only this year, but the next 3, 4, 5 years as, Chet and J-Dub get rookie maxes and Shai gets a super max, and how this has all been very carefully constructed to be a team that contends not only this year, but for several years down the road. So, anything that you go and add that changes the equation, obviously financially with contracts and how this thing has been constructed, but also the on-court, the chemistry. And like you said, the system that the Thunder run, not only offensively, but defensively, and how they're this kind of cohesive unit. So yeah, I agree. That's why I said, if I would do anything, it would just be fringe, like kind of insurance breaking clay in case of emergency. But they also have Brandon Carlson, who's played really well. Maybe something happens with that. Maybe, who knows? So the Thunder set up very, very well. When the number 1 team in the West, in a stacked West, and they have a 6 or 7 game lead, and they're getting Chet Holmgren back. I mean, that's yeah. I don't know what else, how much better you can get.
And your point's a good one. I mean, the fact that they're already historic, what do you hope a trade nets? Like, in all likelihood, if we're because we always do this exercise, Brandon, I don't know if you've caught it, is like before the trade deadline, before the draft, before the season, before the playoffs, best, worst, and then the most likely case scenario for whatever that data point is. If you made a trade, the most likely case would be it actually makes you a little bit worse because you'd come down from whatever these historical numbers are, because it'd really be tough to be better than you have been right now. Now we can put that into some context coming up with Cam Johnson talk, which is what everybody's waiting for, and other NBA players as well. Brandon, let's talk Cam Johnson right off the top. So the Cam Johnson situation is interesting because I think Cam Johnson would make this team a better team functionally in the playoffs. We just talked about how the numbers are great. I would trust Cam Johnson right this second today to hit a playoff 3 more than I would anyone on the Thunder roster on the margins of, like, not Shai, not whatever, Chet, whatever, like the other guys like Joe and Kaysen and Wiggins. But we can't just like make that 1-for-1 thing, because we mentioned at the first segment that all these teams took time to grow. There's guys on Denver and Boston who weren't hitting big time threes in those first few playoffs. It's why they lost in those first few playoffs. And so I think that in a vacuum, yes. Who would you rather have in the playoffs, Wiggins or Cam Johnson? It'd be Cam Johnson. But there's the chemistry side of things. There's a system side of things, which I think Cam Johnson fits the system really well. And then there's the element of, yeah, but what if? There's like the mystery box element of, like, what if this is the year that after seeing the pictures in the playoffs, getting that close, being in that tight series in Dallas, what if now's the time that in these playoff games, they're going to be better. Those guys are going to be better shooting the basketball their second go around. That's a real possibility. And I tell you why it's a real possibility, because of how they're treating the regular season. Like, they're not just relying anymore on Shai. You drive all the way to the restricted area and then you dish it out, because by the time you get deep in the paint, 5 guys are around you. Somebody's wide open. We'll just take those layup line threes. They're getting these guys open looks creatively with, like, off-ball screens and ball movement that you can easily replicate in the playoffs, because like part of the Thunder success last year in terms of, like, being the best 3-point shooting team, which they're no longer that percentage-wise, obviously, was extremely low volume and extremely high shot quality. And it was because of that. Well, in the playoffs, whenever you're not just like lazily going about like, okay, let's just cut off Shai's drive, and you saw what Dallas did playing on a string where they sent help and then they flew back out on the kick, whereas in the regular season, guys don't really fly out that much. They just kind of sit around and see, are you going to make it or not? That came back to bite Oklahoma City. This year, they're trying to correct that in the regular season. From my vantage point, I don't know for a fact that that's a thing that they're trying to do. I think that Mark's alluded to that, but I don't want to put words in his mouth. So, there's an element of, like, yes, vacuum Cam Johnson deadline, that'd be a great move. And if it's a move that they went and made, which I don't think that they will, but if it's a move that they went and made next Thursday, you and I would be on this podcast elated with what that means for this roster. But I don't think that it's a requirement to have this team go far in the playoffs and have this team win a championship.
Yeah, he would be a luxury. I mean, he's a 6'8" shooter that can shoot on the move. He would fit as far as, high character, highly, intelligent basketball player, always makes winning plays. I mean, he's on this Nets team and he's putting up like a 50, 40, 90 season. So I think that he would fit. And I do think, we don't know chemistry wise and all those things, and, taking one guy in, learning the system, taking guys out and all those things. But on paper, a Cam Johnson, 6'8" movement shooter who's, let's say neutral, solid, decent on defense, big body that you can shift in at the 4. He makes a lot of sense. And if the Thunder were to make that trade, I mean, yeah, there would be reason to be excited. Absolutely 100%. But I say it's a luxury because I don't think it's needed. As we've covered, this team is so well constructed, and you give up a little bit depth, and who knows who goes out the door in that, but we know that it would have to be like one of Isaiah Joe or Aaron Wiggins, and then, some sort of combination of other players. And, like a guy like Kenrich Williams, for instance, the Thunder love what Kenrich brings to this team, in the locker room as a leader, but then also on the court as like a small ball 5, and what he brings defensively and what he can do in certain lineups and things like that. So, I think if they were to do it, it makes a lot of sense. and there would be reason to be excited, but I don't think it's needed.
Yeah, and I think that it'd have to be Joe or Wiggins because, like you mentioned, Kenrich is your best curveball. I mean, he's not your best player, but he's your best curveball because they're really good when Kenrich is a small ball 5, and not many teams can match them in that setting, especially for small spurts. So like that's a huge plus. And then the leadership locker room stuff is a huge plus. But I think that we also, like, we as in the common Thunder fan listening right now in the comment section, trying to put together these fake trades, it's always like, well, what if the Nets would take on Dillon Jones, Ousmane Dieng, Brandon Carlson, and all these guys for Cam Johnson? Number one, the Nets wouldn't agree to that. Like the Nets wouldn't agree to even Kenrich Williams and Dillon Jones and those guys. Like, I don't think that Kenrich Williams is a centerpiece of a salary match moves the Nets. But number two, even if it did, I still wouldn't think that that's the right decision because then you're just hoarding players in the sense of those minutes for Cam Johnson have to come from somebody. So let's just hypothetically say that you traded Kenrich, Oos, and Dillon for Cam Johnson's, and of course picks are in there too. Okay, well Cam Johnson gets here, and it's like, hey guys, I'm so glad that we kept Wiggins and Joe, but their minutes are slashed, and Wiggins' minutes is non-existent now. So it's as if you traded them because they're no longer playing. So then you create friction in that case, in my opinion, of like, you can't go from Joe and Wiggins' perspective, like getting all these minutes on a title favorite and number one overall seed. You make a trade, you bring this guy in, and now your career is put on hold for Cam Johnson. Whereas if you would have traded them to Brooklyn, at least they'd be playing. At least Wiggins would be playing, and I think flourishing in Brooklyn. Being in that environment where he's going to get consistent, huge time minutes. So like that plays a part too, to where you're trading a very good player for a very good player. It could happen. I don't think it will happen. If it did happen, it'd be a big win. If it didn't happen, it'd be a win. It's just a no-lose situation here at this trade deadline. And then you have to wonder, well, how much of this trade deadline stuff is just smoke in general? Like, what if Cam Johnson just doesn't get traded? We've seen Brooklyn hold on to their assets before. We've seen Brooklyn be willing to take things into not uncomfortable territory, because it wouldn't be uncomfortable to keep Cam Johnson, but to take them longer than we would expect. If Cam Johnson is still a Brooklyn Net on Friday, that's a huge win for the Thunder, because then you get to have your cake and eat it too. Because guess what happens in the playoffs this year? If Wiggins, Joe, whoever isn't hitting 3-point shots and isn't delivering in the playoffs, you get on that horn and say, well, would you like Wiggins now for Cam Johnson? We'll throw in an extra pick, or we'll throw in Topic or whoever. Then you go make the Cam Johnson trade, and you've gotten to take the temperature, see the data points, and you've gotten your big move. So I just don't see a reason for the Thunder to make a panic decision. And I kind of use last year as the example of, was last year's team really good? Yeah, they were a good basketball team. Did we know at the time of the trade deadline that they had extreme limitations with Josh Giddey? We absolutely did. Did they trade him at the trade deadline? No. Did people say that was a mistake? Yes, they did. Did he get played off the floor in the playoffs and was not very good in the playoffs? Absolutely he was. Were people panicking the day after the playoffs? They absolutely were. Whenever they traded him for Alex Caruso, did everybody say, how in the world did Sam Presti get that much value for a guy who is incompetent in the playoff setting? Yes, they did. So, like, I think that we put so much pressure on the here and now, like this trade deadline. If something went awry in the playoffs, this can still be corrected the first day before the finals even end, as that Josh Giddey trade was completed. So I just think that you have the luxury of time, and you should use that luxury to your advantage to put the bow on. Again, we don't know what this team looks like with their two biggest additions. Like, we don't know what this team looks like fully healthy from how they revamped their roster. So that's why for Cam Johnson, on paper, I love the trade. Love it. And I don't think that if I was in Sam Presti's seat that I could resist the temptation to go make that trade. I really don't. But I also think that it's a good decision to resist that temptation. I'm a weaker man than Sam Presti, because I would have done the trade yesterday. But when you talk it out and really let yourself off the ledge of like, we got to go make a move, it's smart business to not go make a trade like that if you want to really explain it out. Now, that's not to say the Thunder should stand pat at the deadline in the sense of what standing pat is. At the very least, I can promise you they're going to have to make roster moves, and I'll tell you why. We keep hinting at like Brandon Carlson, and some of it is joking, let's be honest, and other part of it is they got to make a decision on Carlson and the bottom of this roster in particular. Carlson's 10-day deal will expire this week. He's ineligible for another 10-day deal. You either have to sign him to that last remaining roster spot, which means AJ Mitchell plays out the year on a 2-way contract, or you convert AJ Mitchell and sign to a standard spot and sign Brendan Carlson to a two-way spot, which is legal. And then Brendan Carlson's ineligible for the playoffs. So I think that we both still think that the most likely outcome is you convert AJ Mitchell and you sign Carlson to a two-way deal to where he is ineligible for the playoffs, and that takes out that insurance policy of Brandon Carlson. And I think that this team could use an insurance policy big because ideally they're fully healthy once Chet returns. Let's be honest, that there's no guarantee that Chet and Hartenstein make it through the entire playoffs. Hopefully, knock on wood, they do, but you want to have something in your back pocket. And right now, that all that's there is Kenrich small ball minutes and Jay Will. And if you can go get a buyout big or even a guy, and I'm not saying this player exactly, I'm saying a player of this ilk, a player of this caliber. If you can go get a guy like Kelly Olynyk, who's low maintenance big, kind of fit your style. It's a unique situation, so it's going to be tough to get an exacto fit, but you can get sort of a fit in Kelly Olynyk. He's not going to cost you a ton in money or trade assets, and you can do some back channeling to figure out if he'd be okay with not playing, because ideally this backup big man insurance will play 0 minutes, like in the ideal world, and he'll just sit there and enjoy the ride to hopefully a championship. But if you need to play him, you want him to be a little bit better than Jay Will. As much as I'm a Jay Will guy, like I think that Kelly Olynyk is better than Jay Will, as just one example. So I really like the idea of that insurance policy big man.
Yeah, that's what. If it were me, that's what I would be looking at. Just as insurance. And I think Olynyk is a good name. I think he's making like $12 million this year. Shai has history with him. Dort has history with him with Team Canada, and he's a guy that can shoot threes, get some boards. Another guy like Yabusele from the 76ers. Yeah. I've seen his name floated. He's shooting really well from three this year. Can get some boards. He's a solid big, and who knows what the 76ers are doing. Guys like that. Yeah, I think that's where I would look. If I'm the Thunder, like just an emergency, just in case big for the playoffs, just to have one in your back pocket. And again, it could be Carlson.
It could be Carlson.
But we'll see what happens with that whole situation. And then another thing, and I don't know if we want to get into this, but I think something that could be very likely is kicking picks down the road, like some 2025 picks, like least favorable of, Clippers, Rockets, Thunder / Heat pick / 76ers pick for a 2031 Suns pick. That's the window now. The Jazz have that. But just for instance, a trade like that can make a lot of sense as well. That obviously has nothing to do with the roster or a championship this year, but Sam Presti has done the trades. Those trades are already looking really good, by the way. So something like that makes a lot of sense too, kicking some picks down the road for higher upside picks.
Yeah, they're going to, I think, end up doing something in the sense of like something is something, where it's like you got to make a decision on Carlson. That's at least something. I don't think it's going to be the extent that people want of like Cam Johnson. Now, the name that I think is interesting, and I want to be very clear, this is like if for some reason the Thunder hired me as the GM, which they're not going to do, luckily for you all at home, because I would have selected Jalen Green and traded up to go get Jalen Green. Colin Sexton. To me, I think that like if you could find a way to get Colin Sexton, and I don't know how it would really work, to be quite honest with you, because you've got to find minutes for him. You've got to find a trade that Utah would even, like you would even do. But if you could get Colin Sexton on the cheap, trade asset wise, I think he's the perfect guy to fill in those the role that you wanted AJ Mitchell to fill into. And it's not to like abandon AJ Mitchell, but it's a pretty tall ask that like, this was a fun story. This was a great rookie campaign start for AJ. And I wrote an exclusive with AJ. I think that he's going to have an amazing NBA career, but he just came off of a 10 to 12 week injury. Like putting yourself into the future. He just came off of a 10 to 12 week injury. And his first return to NBA action is like the playoffs as a rookie after not playing since, whenever, January, December, whenever it was. Like, that's almost impossible to call on him again. And he's done the impossible already this season, so I'm not going to rule him out. But you'd feel a lot better about a guy like Colin Sexton, at least, in that role. But it just seems like there's too many unique hurdles, I guess, to clear for Colin Sexton. But, like, am I just crazy? Is Sexton, could you picture that being a Thunder guy?
Yeah, so I agree with you. The Thunder kind of, like, showed their hands as far as, like, AJ Mitchell was playing the creator playmaker role with the bench unit. And they selected Nikola Topic also, I think, with that role in mind. So they want a guy off the bench to be another creator around J-Dub and the bench unit. And it will be hard for AJ to come back. Hopefully he does. Hopefully he comes back and plays like he was, but it'll be tough coming off that injury. So we'll see about that. So Colin Sexton, microwave scorer, can really put up some points. It does make sense. And the Thunder already have a draft pick that's perfect for Utah. Just give them back that pick that may or may not convey, and it gives them like the liberty to not have to worry next year about it being a top protected pick. So they get the pick back. I would worry about like the defense, because this is such a defensive minded team, and I don't know about that part, because even AJ was playing really good defense. So I worry about that. So I'll throw them at you with that in mind. Now, the De'Aaron Fox rumors to the Spurs in mind, maybe they wouldn't want to make a trade like this, but maybe like a Chris Paul reunion, right? Like CP3,
Chris Paul reunion, baby.
SGA's mentor off the bench to lead that unit, still plays some D, and running. He's played really well this season. Kind of full circle moment, trying to get a ring with the Thunder back in OKC. So I'll throw that out there too. It's a fun idea.
Yeah,
but the Spurs may want to hold on to if they're actually going to go for this.
I like the Chris Paul on a buyout. Like if there's a trade for Fox, which I don't know that will actually happen. It's really complicated to make that happen at the deadline period, especially with a week's notice at the deadline. But if it did happen, where it's like, oh, it's Sacramento got Chris Paul, but Chris Paul doesn't want to be there. Sacramento has kind of resided to the fact that this is kind of over. They buy out Chris Paul, and then he comes to OKC. That'd be really fun. And I think that would be a situation where he would understand that you're really here as like a coach on the floor. At best, you're like the Derek Fisher of this run. And ideally, you're just playing backup minutes and like secondary unit minutes. And there's might be some nights where you don't play at all. Like, I think it'd be really interesting. I think that he has the maturity at this point of his career to handle all that. But a quick point on Sexton, like what I find curious about Sexton's defense is he's in the 56th percentile on all defensive possessions, according to Synergy this season, which is good. He only lets up 0.927 points per possession defensively. That's while playing in Utah on a tanking team. Now, a tanking team that has rim protection, so obviously that helps a guard. But if you put him on this Thunder team and surround him with this many defenders and change his defensive assignment, like this is a guy who, as a pick and roll ball handler defender, only lets up 0.795 points per possession, which is in the 77th percentile. He's in the 82nd percentile of stopping spot up shooters. Like this is a guy who could just ascend if he was hypothetically put in Oklahoma City at this deadline. So that's why I really like his name as one for the Thunder, because of all that defensive metrics that we just went over. But Brandon, the Chris Paul stuff got really loud today. I would be just overjoyed with what it would do for this podcast, because the day that Chris Paul would come back hypothetically to the Thunder, I think would be the all-time most downloaded show in show history. So that'd be really great for me personally in my bank account. But Brandon, let them know where they can find all your great stuff. I appreciate all the time you gave us. We went really long on today's show, but it was worth it. It's the deadline, baby. We're rocking and rolling.
Yeah, this was fun. Thanks for having me on for this episode. You can find me at dailythunder.com. You can find me Franchise Radio 107.7 in Oklahoma City, KREF Radio, OKC Dream Team with Rylan, and you can find me on Twitter at Brandon Rahbar.
And perhaps if we have Dream Team duty tomorrow, we'll double dip with the Warriors recap. We'll see. I might talk Brandon into a Warriors recap that you'll have to tune in tomorrow to figure out if I can pull off the art of the deal and get Brandon back here for tomorrow night. But until then, going to be good to one another.